Today we're making a simple 1x1 inch fox. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna make one of these edges flat, but just flat enough so that the piece of wood stays upright like this. For this we only need a few rough cuts. Next we're gonna make a simple S shape, and for that I'm gonna divide this upper face in half. So here's the bottom. This one I'm gonna split like this, and that S shape is gonna start from here and it's gonna go very close to the edge, but not quite, because we're gonna make a round shape, so we're not gonna need this sharp edge. Then the middle point of the shape is gonna be the middle point of the block this way. Then it's gonna go along this line, and the end point of the S shape is gonna be right here. So 1/4 of this face from this edge, and about 2/5 of this section from this edge. And then we can draw a straight line from this end point of the curve to here, like that. And now we can cut out all of this wood. This bit requires just a few rough cuts. Like that. Pretty much the same over here. And then this curve can be carved with a few sweeping cuts. And you're gonna need to cut from both sides, because due to the grain of the wood, that's basically the only way to get a clean cut. Now we don't have to finish this to be the final level of cleanness, but it should be decent. Now here with this curve, we have the wideness that we're gonna need. So we can just make a line all the way through that meets these edges, and then we can remove all of this wood. Next we're gonna slim down both of these edges. So based on the bottom, we can draw two lines that mark a section that is about as wide as this bottom part, and the same on the other side, like this. And then over here, this is where the head is going to be. This is where the ears are gonna be. So from this line, we can draw a triangular shape, something like this. Well, it's actually rectangular due to this face, but this kind of a pointy shape, like that connects to these lines. And now we're gonna remove these bits. That's good. Then the other side, and for that we're gonna mark the middle point of this face, and then this part is gonna be divided into two again, like this. And from here we can make a basic shape for the tail. So all the way to this line, we can make these two gentle curves, like that. And we can remove this extra wood. These sweeping cuts work nicely to get the shape going. Actually, I'm gonna leave this slightly wider than this, because the tail is easily adjustable later on. We don't need to make a sharp corner over here, but we can make a few tighter sweeping cuts so that the distinction is a little more clear. Next we're gonna make some triangles. So we can divide this height into 3 parts, like that. And then over here on the top to this line, we're connecting our first triangle, something like that. Now we can cut this shape. And that we're gonna do with V-cuts that'll slowly turn into stop cuts. So once you get the shape going, you can just press the blade directly into the wood along this line, and then make these stop cuts. And almost always it's easier to remove sharp edges, so it doesn't make sense to work on this from one direction only. We can focus on removing these sharp edges since they're the easiest to remove, and then go back to the center. And then again to the sides. That's good enough for now. Next we're gonna make another triangle, and that's gonna start from around here. So we wanna leave a little bit of space over here for the snout. We don't wanna start straight from this corner, but slightly below. And then we're gonna make a triangle like this. All the sides of the triangle should be about the same length. And for this, I think it's easiest to start with these sweeping cuts. We can take away this sharp edge, do the same on the other side. And then a little bit in the middle like this. And then we can start making V cuts. Due to the grain of the wood, this is a little bit of an awkward place to cut, which is why you just need to focus on making small cuts, working your way towards this corner bit by bit. Don't make cuts with a lot of force. That's only going to lead to hurting yourself or chipping off a big piece of this figure. There's no rush. You just make small cuts and eventually you'll get there. Now cutting this way, so away from the body of the fox, is much easier. So once you get to the point where you can fit at least part of the blade in between here in order to make cuts, I think it's a good idea to take advantage of that. What I'm doing here is what I call a reverse push cut. So instead of just pushing this blade over here without any control point, I'm using my thumb to push against the knife and then creating this movement only with the twist of my wrist. So even though there's this V cut that'll probably stop the blade if I slip doing something like this, this still gives a lot more control and makes the cuts a lot safer. That's good enough for now. Next we're gonna do a little bit of work on this in-between area between the front limbs and the hind limbs. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna redraw this center line. You can measure it if you want. I'm gonna draw it all the way down here, and then I'm gonna divide this section into 3 parts. And the hind limbs, I'm gonna start from this line, and then we're gonna make a line like this over here to this edge and a line like that. So just a 90-degree angle over here. Then I'm gonna follow this curve over here, basically do an offset curve. Maybe over here there can be a little bit more mass, but something like this. And then this is just a straight line. But still, you gotta notice that over here, the legs are gonna be slightly thicker than over here. So like that. And now by removing all of this, we get a pretty decent side profile. I'm gonna copy this onto the other side. Basically just a mirror image. I'm making that in order to avoid some accidents, since this is a little bit more of a complicated shape than these triangles, for example. This is again one of those cases where starting with sweeping cuts is really nice and easy, and then we can work our way to sharper corners. And these right here are just basic V cuts where I cut from 2 different sides. This is good enough for now. It doesn't really make sense to cut this all the way through right now because we have a lot of unnecessary thickness over here. And this is probably the most difficult area to cut in this entire project. Why would we cut over twice as much in this difficult area if we don't need to? So right now I'm gonna do a little bit of rounding. I'm gonna take away all of these unnecessary sharp edges, and I'm also gonna slim down these legs so that they flow a lot smoother and slim down towards the bottom a lot smoother. At the same time we're rounding these edges, we can also slim down places of the body that look disproportionately thick. So like over here, the head is going to be slimmer than the rest of the body. And also I think this is still a little bit too thick. It should be about the same sideways as it is this way. So I can remove a little bit of this thickness also from here. And I think these push cuts are the most important cut in this step of this project. I'm also gonna give this tail a little bit of a better shape. So I'm gonna remove this corner. I'm gonna slim the tail down a little bit. And then I'm gonna end it somewhere around here where it almost touches the ground, but not quite. Next we're going to continue working on this. So we just need this rectangular shape. And now that this is a lot thinner, it's much easier to carve. And again, I'm starting with sweeping cuts, kind of like making this V cut where one side is a regular V cut and the other side is a sweeping cut. Then we can emphasize this joint of the leg with a few V cuts. Creating something like that. And then we can remove this unnecessary bit. And now when we also make some V cuts over here, we get that more rectangular shape of this cap that we were looking for, and we get this pretty decent hind limb shape. Based on the cuts we just made, it's now easier to further slim down the body of the fox so that it looks proportionate from all different angles. Next we're going to work on the head, and that'll start with slimming down the snout a little more. So I'm making some sweeping cuts to make the snout slimmer and a little bit rounder. And then the tip is going to be rounded from the bottom so that it curves like that. And we're going to make a few sweeping cuts here on the top also. They're just going to be a little tighter. This way we're going to be able to create a separation between the muzzle and the forehead. And then we're going to continue those sweeping cuts to the sides like this. And that way we get the eye sockets. Next we're going to make the ears, and they're going to be something like this. And I'm starting by separating the ears from each other a little bit with these sweeping cuts. And then I'm going to be making a few V cuts. And here where the ears end, I'm making stop cuts so that the ears are a little bit more outward compared to the back. So this is basically like a similar triangular shape to the snout, because the ears are pointing back as the fox is stretching itself. So just a pointy shape like this, made with some V cuts, and then there's this distinction between the ears. Next, we're gonna make a curve over here. So starting from this corner of the ear, same on the other side, just a curve like that. And we're gonna make some stop cuts. Like that. And then the same on the other side. And now this cut also reveals that there's still too much mass over here. So with a few push cuts, we can make the shape of the body a lot more proportionate. Next, we're going to separate the legs from each other a little bit, and that can be done with these V-cuts. Sweeping cuts like these can also come in handy. Now this is a little bit tricky, but even a very small distinction between the legs is gonna make a big difference. Over here we're gonna have to make a pyramid cut. So I'm cutting from 3 different sides. And that way I can get this inverted pyramid shape. That's pretty much it for the project. Now the only thing left to do is a little cleanup if there are some adjustments you need to make. But other than that, we're pretty much done. And if you want to learn about what I did to paint this project, you can click on this video right here.